My name is Zhaojie, a boy among many in our village bearing the same name. We carry the legacy of baby girls who passed away here decades earlier, girls we honor as our sisters. Sister, please come back. Sister, come back. Mom and Dad miss you. Sister, come back. Your brothers long to see you. A procession of over 100 young men weaved through the village, their chants echoing a deep yearning for their sister. At the forefront, a monk intoned sacred texts, indecipherable to us. Trailing behind him, our parents and the village elders dabbed their tears, their cries heartfelt. Daughter, please return. Your parents yearn for you. I mingled with the crowd, and it wasn't until 3 exhausting hours later that the ceremony concluded. Our 7th this month alone. For too long, no baby girls have graced our village. Once no one minded. What use was a girl when boys were prized? Families solely desired boys, solely nurtured boys. Yet those boys matured into men who found themselves woefully unmatched. Our village, overrun with bachelors, pined for wives. Yet the scarcity of women, compounded by our village's impoverishment and isolation, left few willing to wed. Girls from afar demand homes, vehicles, and hefty dowries. Marrying often costs a fortune. Yet these women hesitate to settle into their new rural lives, a regrettable bargain. Today, every young woman vocally seeks human rights, independence, and a chance to realize her self-worth. They are far from the naive souls who populated the earth decades ago. With an abundance of unmarried, aging men, the village desperately needs wives. It needs new life, or it will gradually disappear, leaving no one to mourn the departed. The village chief, seized by inspiration, surmised that the baby girls who perished here years ago must have grown up somewhere else. What if we could bring them back as brides for our local men? It seemed a perfect solution. These girls would find their belonging, and our young men, their spouses. Should any girl be born henceforth, we would cherish and nurture her, forsaking the brutal practices of the past. Though many young people harbored scant hope for such rituals, attending them out of stark necessity, today marked a change. After the ceremony, a girl with waist-long hair and flushed cheeks entered the village, her demeanor shy. Softly, she spoke. "Excuse me, have I caused any disturbance? It wasn't my intention. This place, it feels like I've returned home." Her words electrified the villagers. Was this a sign of success? Though only she had returned, if this ceremony proved its merit, surely others would follow in due time. "Indeed, you're right, my dear. This place is your home." The village immediately brightened with welcoming smiles. "Come, let me show you around. Perhaps you'll recognize a place that feels like home." "Sure." Her smile was warm as she toured the village with the chief, who finally halted at my doorstep. "This place feels most familiar," he declared. My peers smirked and nudged each other, teasing me in silent jest. If this girl was my sister, then my hopes were dashed. My parents greeted her with open arms. She too was a Sioux, named Yuan, and my parents beamed even brighter, affirming that family bonds hold, regardless of time. Yuan quickly warmed to my parents. As I observed their affectionate exchanges, doubts crept into my mind. Could she truly be my sister? Such questions, however, were too perilous to voice aloud. A curious conviction slowly emerged within me. Ideally, Yuan would be my sister, but even if not, she simply had to be. That night, Yuan stayed with us. My parents prepared the finest room, stacking it with plush mattresses and fresh blankets. Her cheeks tinged with a blush, Yuan repeatedly murmured her apologies. Yet she comfortably settled in. It was as if she had indeed come home. She embraced this place as hers, swiftly beginning to call my parents as her own. The village watched Yuan's every step, observing her seamless integration. Her graceful demeanor met with unanimous approval from the community. The success of the ritual was undeniable, leading the village chief to orchestrate another grand ceremony the following day. Yuan looked on, bemused. In a subdued tone, I offered an explanation, tiptoeing around the harsher truth. Over the past few decades, our village has lost several girls. These ceremonies are our hope to bring them back. However, these weren't mere disappearances. These were lives cruelly taken. The next morning, a procession of families arrived at our door, gifts in hand, each eager to secure the first proposal. My mother beamed with joy, yet faced with numerous suitors, it was a classic dilemma of having many contenders for one prized connection. It seemed taken for granted that Yuanyuan would obediently agree to marry. Yet, to everyone's shock, Su Yuanyuan disappeared just when decisions needed to be made. Panic ensued among my parents. Suitors were lined up for courtship, love, and marriage. What could her disappearance mean at such a time? A village-wide search ensued. It wasn't long before we found Yuanyuan. She was on the mountain, squatting beside a tree, and surrounded by a crowd. She simply smiled, saying, "This place feels oddly familiar." Glancing warily at my parents, whose faces had turned sour, I hesitantly pieced together a grim possibility. Could this be the very place where Su Yuanyuan had once been left behind? Indeed, she was my sister, brought back with memories of a former life, or perhaps more accurately, summoned by our collective will. Upon her return, however, Su Yuanyuan was not inclined to consider marriage. Despite the plethora of young men in our village, none seemed to spark her interest, nor was she inclined to engage with them seriously. My father erupted in anger. "Girls are expected to marry. What do you intend to do if not marry? Are you contemplating marrying someone outside our village? Why must you be so headstrong?" Su Yuanyuan, visibly distressed, spoke in a low voice. "I'm not ready to marry just yet. I've only just returned, just found my way back to my parents. I want to cherish more time with them." Her plea softened my parents' stance. My mother sighed. "My foolish child, we're all together in this village. Even if you marry, you won't be far from us. But you are also maturing, and remaining unwed isn't proper. There are numerous young, handsome men right here. Surely you can choose one." Perhaps it was Su Yuanyuan's earlier acquiescence that had led everyone to expect her compliance. Her sudden rebellion and steadfast refusal to marry took everyone by surprise. My parents were momentarily furious. After all, they had summoned Su Yuanyuan back with the specific intention for her to marry well within the village, thereby ensuring lineage continuation. In a similar vein, should another family's daughter be brought back, she would be expected to marry into our family and extend our lineage. This scenario is intended to be mutually beneficial, bringing joy to all parties involved. We were the first family to reclaim a daughter, tasked with setting a precedent. Yet, Su Yuanyuan's reluctance is proving profoundly disheartening. I too am caught up in the urgency. If Su Yuanyuan refuses to marry, might this mean that other girls, once returned, would also reject me? At 26, I am anxious to marry and raise a family. I have no intention of favoring sons over daughters. A balanced family would be ideal. Nonetheless, I had underestimated the collective desperation about this matter. Regardless of Su Yuanyuan's agreement, her aversion to meeting suitors meant we had to settle on a marriage for her. It is unfortunate. She could have chosen someone she genuinely loved and wished to marry, but now that decision would be imposed on her. Before long, her groom was selected, Chun Shun, the village chief's eldest son. Chun Shun approached our home with joviality, presenting 2 boxes of gifts, then swiftly lifted Su Yuanyuan, departing as my parents chuckled with glee. They were ecstatic, repeatedly extolling the marriage, particularly proud that she was to marry the village chief's son. As I stood by, watching Su Yuanyuan being taken away, I was powerless to stop it. The villagers have long been accustomed to resolving matters with brute force, and what could someone of my modest standing possibly do? Unable to curb my curiosity, I opened Su Yuanyuan's bag that she had inadvertently left behind. I had anticipated finding some form of identification but was met with an empty black cloth bag save for a handkerchief. Wrapped within this handkerchief was a piece of paper that instantly sent shivers through me. The paper starkly claimed that Su Yuanyuan was now 45 years old. This seemed impossible. It had to be incorrect. I couldn't accept it. Su Yuanyuan's marriage to Chun Shun was meant to be a significant celebration, marking the first village wedding in many years. The elders had been fervently hoping for this, akin to watching for the moon and stars, eagerly awaiting the day when the youth would establish their own families and produce hardy offspring, fulfilling the elders' long-held wishes. Su Yuanyuan and Chun Shun's wedding, though not grand, was bustling with activity, thrown together quickly but attended by a large crowd. In rural traditions, a mere acknowledgement of the heavens and the earth completes the marriage ceremony. However, no one could have foreseen that immediately following their vows, Chen Shun would collapse. He spat blood, his body seized with convulsions, and he ceased breathing all too soon. He perished on his wedding day. The crowd was momentarily paralyzed with shock, struggling to comprehend the unfolding tragedy. By the time they reacted and moved to help, Chen Shun had already passed away. Su Yuanyuan stood by, visibly disoriented and terrified, her eyes brimming with fear. It was unimaginable that a ceremony meant to celebrate union had morphed into a grim farewell. Who could bear the transformation of a celebration into a calamity? As events unfolded, the wedding was inevitably abandoned. Being the only daughter, the prospect of her enduring widowhood was unthinkable. Su Yuanyuan retreated to her home, locking herself in her room to weep for many hours. I lingered at her door, yearning to provide solace yet finding myself at a loss for words, implicated as I was in the unfolding drama. The day following Chen Shun's death, the village chief, visibly aged by the ordeal, led a solemn procession to our doorstep once more. He has 3 sons, with the eldest, Chen Shun, who was to marry Su Yuanyuan and now gone. It fell to his second son, Chen Liang, to step forward. The village chief's resolve was unshakable. He was determined to ensure the continuation of the Chen lineage, insisting that if not through the eldest, then the responsibility must pass to the next. Perhaps not for the first time being coerced into matrimony, Su Yuanyuan appeared markedly composed. She followed almost passively, participating in a ceremony even more hastily conducted than the last. Yet, during the sacred rites to heaven and earth, calamity struck again. Chen Liang fell, succumbing in the identical, mysterious manner as his brother. Stricken by rage and sorrow, the village chief collapsed. Who could withstand the agony of losing 2 sons in as many days? Once more, Su Yuanyuan was returned to her home. She retreated to her room, shedding tears for hours, until I could no longer stand by silently. Approaching her, I murmured, "There's no need for sorrow. I am not sorrowful." Her voice was faint, a ghostly whisper. I blinked, for her lips had not moved. Whence had that voice come? Su Yuanyuan turned her gaze towards me, the corners of her mouth subtly lifting in a wistful smile, her eyes utterly mesmerizing. "Do you wish to partake in the wedding rites with me?" "No, no, no," I hastily replied, taken aback. "She is my sister. How could I contemplate such a union?" Silently, Su Yuanyuan lowered her head, prompting me to withdraw swiftly from her presence. To my surprise, the village chief visited once more, yet this time he brought forth Wang Peng, a youth from our neighboring family, as a prospective groom. Cautiously, the village chief had not dared to involve his youngest son, fearing the extinction of his lineage, the gravest curse in our rural ethos. Wang Peng, facing the monumental task of marriage, exhibited neither joy nor eagerness but a ghastly pallor. I could sense his fear. After all, both sons of the village chief had perished inexplicably during their wedding rites with Su Yuanyuan. Could he be next? Marriage is desirable, but surely not at the expense of one's very life. Whether by fortune or fate, he survived the ceremony, dispelling fears that the previous tragedies were anything but cruel twists of fate, rather than a sinister pattern. The village chief, his features etched with unease, ordered the newlyweds to the bridal chamber. But it was then that another unforeseen event unfolded. A sudden scream pierced the stillness of the bridal chamber. It was Su Yuanyuan's voice. I sprang to my feet, intent on dashing inside, but was swiftly restrained by those around me. "What are you up to, you foolish boy?" "They're in their wedding chamber." Around me, the elders chuckled, their laughter tinged with innuendo. My cheeks flamed with embarrassment. I wasn't naive. I understood perfectly what they were hinting at, yet my heart was gripped by a relentless fear of some mishap occurring. After that initial anguished scream, the sound of something heavy tumbling to the floor echoed through the chamber. Then silence fell. When the time arrived for the bride and groom to emerge and toast the guests, there was no sign of them. Impatient, the village chief finally sent someone to investigate. What they discovered inside the chamber left everyone aghast. The chaotic scene they had envisioned hadn't taken place. Instead, Su Yuanyu was found seated on the edge of the bed, her garments in disarray, her face streaked with tears. There, the groom lay on the ground, his complexion ghostly pale. He had been dead for some time. This marked the third death at one of Su Yuanyuan's weddings. Once again, Su Yuanyuan was taken back to my house, and for several days no prospective suitors dared to call. The ritual to solicit a husband was enacted repeatedly, my own voice going hoarse from all the shouting. Yet, amidst this weariness, I couldn't help but notice the strangeness about Su Yuanyu, her frequent escapes to the mountain. Young though I was, I understood the grim lore associated with that place, long abandoned and normally shunned by all. The grim purpose of that spot was for disposing of deceased household pets, and tragically, also the unwanted female infants from some families. Given the ominous rumors swirling around Su Yuanyu and branding her as a harbinger of bad luck and a curse to her husbands, I doubted anyone would marry her again. Everyone yearned for descendants, but no one was eager to risk their lives for it. Yet, 3 days later, someone did come forward. It was Zhaojie, the village's eldest bachelor. Now 40, only 5 years younger than my father. He had been desperate to find a wife for 2 decades. With his parents long past, he was utterly alone. Upon his arrival, Zhaojie declared bluntly, "I'm not afraid of dying. I just want to marry and have children." This frank admission won over my parents. Su Yuanyu, once cherished upon her return, had quickly become a burden, her potential to bring further misfortune a looming question. With another mouth to feed, my parents were relieved to find someone willing to take her. Zhaojie handled things roughly. Though he was technically marrying, he held no celebration and merely hoisted Su Yuanyu over his shoulder, taking her straight to his home. In our tightly knit village, Zhaojie's deeds were visible to all, and curious eyes watched to see if he would emerge from his home the next day. Zhaojie remained indoors, not due to any tragedy, but because he was utterly engrossed in his conjugal bliss, unable to leave his bridal chamber. Zhaojie didn't die. Rather, he found contentment with Su Yuanyu. Radiant and boastful, he would rave about Su Yuanyu's silky skin, her elegant form, and her captivating sounds. His tales left the village's lifelong bachelors seething with envy. Each regretted not seizing their chance to be with her, imagining themselves in Zhaojie's place, blissfully happy. Who could have imagined that a moment's hesitation would allow an old bachelor like Zhaojie such a stroke of luck? He was exceedingly fortunate. During her third visit home after their marriage, Su Yuanyu looked well but remained reticent, barely speaking. Despite my attempts to engage her in conversation, she didn't respond. However, post-lunch, Zhaojie whisked her away, loudly proclaiming their need to hurry home and continue their efforts to have a son. My parents chided Zhaojie for his rush but couldn't suppress their amusement. This certainly proved that Su Yuanyu was no curse. Those who died early simply weren't as blessed. I had believed we were in for peaceful times. Yet tragically, Zhaojie met an unexpected end. Zhaojie died. He perished in Su Yuanyu's bed, suddenly breathless. His death eerily mirrored the earlier demise of Wang Peng. Once more, Su Yuanyu was taken back to my home. This time, she didn't cry, choosing instead to remain silent. She locked herself away in her room, refusing to see anyone. Yet, this time, no one attributed Zhaojie's death to Su Yuanyu. The consensus was that Zhaojie had died from his own excessive indulgences, literally exhausting himself to death. What did Su Yuanyu have to do with that? Surely, being irresistibly charming wasn't her fault. Su Yuanyu was married again. Her new husband was our neighbor, Tiangu. Tiangu, over 30 and still with a younger brother at home, had been unsuccessful in finding a wife despite a decade of matchmaking. I had assumed that Tiangu, having married Su Yuanyuan, would live a contented life with her. But I had not anticipated that Tiangu had no intention of having Su Yuanyu and bear him a son. He had reduced her to a prostitute instead. The very next day after bringing Su Yuanyuan home, Tiangu hung a sign at his front gate, 100 yuan per visit, with the village's young men nearing their breaking point after years of frustration. Initially, nobody dared to take up the offer, but it wasn't long before the first brave soul stepped forward, quickly followed by the second, the third, numerous others. By the time I arrived, alerted to the situation, Tiangu was gleefully counting his money by the gate. Spotting me, Tiangu chuckled, "Hey, kid, want to give it a try? How could you do this?" Furious, I swung a punch at him. Tiangu sneered and shoved me aside with a kick. "Kid, why do you care? If you're here to play, get in line. If not, get lost." "But she's my sister." My anger boiled over. Was this vile man truly treating my sister this way? "Do you actually believe she's your sister?" Tiangu laughed coldly. "A stray woman appears, and suddenly she's your sister? Only fools like you would fall for that absurd summon sister sham." I don't believe a word of it. I stood frozen, shocked. Half of the village's youth had adopted new names for the summon sister ritual. Tiangu hadn't changed his name, nor did he partake in the rituals. He seemed utterly detached. Continuing, Tiangu said, "Regarding this woman, who knows how many men she's been with? She's tainted and I wouldn't want her, but she might as well earn me some money." He smirked again. "And for those desperate for a son, let them turn to Su Yuanyu. When the child is born, we'll see whose progeny it is." Tianji's schemes were chillingly calculated. Most people in the village weren't wealthy, which explained their desperate attempts over the years to find wives, even resorting to something as desperate as a summon sister ritual. Yet, their combined wealth was considerable. Everyone else sought to possess Su Yuanyuan. But Tiangu, having had her, decided instead to exploit her, sharing her with others to enrich himself. When I'm financially able, finding a woman to bear my child will seem like a trivial matter. Tiangu had a foolproof plan, and I left without a word, heading home defeated. Yet, I hadn't anticipated that overnight, over a dozen men in the village would perish. These men appeared unconnected, but Tiangu and I knew they had all been in Su Yuanyuan's room the previous day. All the men who had been with Su Yuanyu and were now dead. What a horrifying thought. What kind of bewitchment does Su Yuanyuan hold? Tiangu was petrified. The families of the deceased were in an uproar, demanding answers. That very night, Tiangu fled in a panic, only to be intercepted by the villagers before he could escape. I don't know where they took Tiangu or what he faced. After observing the turmoil, I entered my room and saw a woman on the bed. Her gaze was enticing, and I instantly stiffened, afraid to look again. It was Su Yuanyuan. She beckoned with a smile. "Come here. I'm no fool." I understood her intentions but couldn't comply, not only because she was my sister but more so because I feared death. I spun around and dashed outside. Yet by the next day, my father was dead. Su Yuanyuan had vanished. I'm unsure where she has gone, or her intentions. She hasn't been seen in public for ages, yet traces of her presence linger, each marked by the death of someone in a household. It's now widely believed that intimacy with Su Yuanyu spells death. Yet, bafflingly, some still follow her siren call. Fear of death grips everyone, yet they seem irresistibly drawn to Su Yuanyuan's allure. How has it reached this point? As the death toll climbs, so does the panic. But still, the rituals to summon a sister persist. With each death, the desperate need for progeny intensifies. In many families, like that of the former village chief, only one male remains. Without an heir, their lineage faces extinction. Countless have turned their anger towards Su Yuanyu and, with loud calls to banish her, spearheaded by my own mother. She loathes the enigmatic Su Yuanyuan, whom she blames for her husband's demise. Daily, the villagers split their efforts. Some engage in the rituals, while others hunt for Su Yuanyuan. Su Yuanyuan is a ghost among us, visible only when tragedy strikes. Driven by desperation, I led a group to a mountain she had known well. By chance, I found her here. Beneath that tree stood Su Yuanyuan, barefoot, her head cocked as if puzzled by her own thoughts. Su Yuanyuan, what are you really? I am just Su Yuanyuan, she replied, her expression one of unaffected innocence. Why would you ask such a thing? The reasons were glaringly evident. It was merely my courage that faltered. Why had the village spiraled into a series of bizarre tragedies since your arrival? Why had there been so many deaths, each inexplicably linked to you? What sort of fiend or specter are you, and why do you wreak such havoc? Yet, these words remained unspoken, for Su Yuanyu had not chosen to come here. She was initially summoned, wasn't she? And those subsequent marriages, were they truly her choice? Those nights they spent with her, did she consent to them? I know all this, yet resentment festers within me. I resent Su Yuanyuan. Her very existence has wrought countless deaths. Why don't you just die, you wretch? My mother surged forward in fury, intent on leading the vengeful charge to end Su Yuanyuan. Following her were several women, each having lost husbands and sons, all united in their frantic quest to end Su Yuanyuan's life. Su Yuanyuan appeared utterly indifferent, oblivious to the chaos around her. She observed silently, her expression one of confusion over the unfolding events. I remained still, rooted to the spot in silence. Then, Su Yuanyuan stirred. She offered a faint smile. The next moment, she vanished once again from my sight. When the dense fog finally cleared, I was confronted with her true visage. The persistent fog that had shrouded the village dispersed, revealing Su Yuanyuan's real face to us all. Stranger still was the resurrection of the villagers thought long dead. Buried and at peace, they now clawed their way out from the earth, their decaying flesh foul-smelling and their eyes reduced to mere hollows. Their hands extended straight, eagerly seizing and ruthlessly shredding those around them. They had transcended humanity, morphing into beasts driven solely by a lust for carnage. In the midst of this chaos stood Su Yuanyuan, barely recognizable but for the two scraps of cloth clinging to her. She had metamorphosed into a grotesque construct of minced flesh. Upon closer inspection, she seemed to be an amalgamation of countless tiny, indistinguishable corpses, with no way to discern a nose from eyes, hands from arms. Two swatches of fabric clung to this macabre mass of flesh. Could this really be the Su Yuanyuan I remembered? Once radiant with a gentle smile that lit up her eyes? What kind of macabre, ludicrous jest was this? No, this isn't right. It simply cannot be. Has everything that's unfolded, everything I've witnessed, been nothing more than an illusion? Or is it merely some sleight of hand by Su Yuanyuan? Moreover, the recently deceased have all been interred in their own plots. How then could they appear here on this mountain so suddenly? But contemplation is a luxury I can no longer afford. A powerful grip encircled my throat, and I nearly heard the crunch of my own bones. The figure hoisting me by the neck, holding me aloft, was my father. I had grieved for his passing only recently, and now here he was, intent on ending my life. Su Yuanyuan appeared once more. At a soft hum from her, my father's hands fell away. He knelt on the ground, caressing the flesh on Su Yuanyuan's leg like a dog. Su Yuanyuan then spoke. She gestured towards the flesh on her leg. "This is your sister." Her words were meant for me. Fighting back a violent cough, I managed to keep myself upright. My gaze locked on Su Yuanyuan as I awaited her continuation. I have been conscious of this for over 40 years, here on this mountain. I know neither how I came to be here nor where I am destined to go, but I am thankful for the yearly offerings you have made. These young girls have been my most cherished offerings. Now, as I am finally able to leave this place, I have decided to fulfill their collective wish. Their wish is uniform. They wish for your demise. Su Yuanyuan's voice seemed to emanate from nowhere, its tones shifting between soft and sharp, high and low, sometimes filled with joy, at other times laden with sorrow. It dawned on me, belatedly, that this was no ordinary voice. Su Yuanyu and appeared to chuckle. At the beginning, your kindness and gentleness nearly convinced me of your sincerity. I yearned for a family, yet I have none. So there was a fleeting moment when I contemplated sparing you. But I soon realized you saw me only as a vessel for childbearing. Given that, how could I possibly fulfill your desires? Now that you are barren, you might as well die. You are unworthy of descendants. As her words fell, peril swiftly followed. I had no time to ponder. I simply ran. Behind me, the chilling sound of blades sinking into flesh filled the air. As one by one, people collapsed. I knew not who they were nor how far I had run when it hit me. My mother was still back there, but it was already too late. I was too late to save her. Desperate, I thought of the last person who might save me, the master. He dwelled in a modest house at the village gate. Upon my arrival, I found him seated, quietly reciting scriptures. He looked up, his smile faint, and said, "The ritual I taught you was meant to summon the spirits, to grant those children peace. Yet, I never envisioned that you would leave their bodies abandoned in the wilderness, their unresolved grievances empowering dark forces. What tragic, profound injustices. So, it was never really possible to summon those people back to bear children for us, right?" "Certainly not," the master replied with a rare flicker of sarcasm. "How could you ever subscribe to such ludicrous notions? Indeed, how could anyone entertain such preposterous ideas? Why would anyone imagine that after taking the life of an infant girl and abandoning her corpse in the wilderness, the fleeting ties of this lifetime, even shadowed by enmity, could prompt them to honor their parents' kindness in a future life, to venture vast distances to this village, to bear children for men who find themselves without wives? Just as Su Yuanyu and had been forced to do, endlessly married off, used as nothing more than an instrument for fulfilling others' desires and for bearing children. How could they dare to believe that such notions could be realized? How could they dare to hope that everything would unfold as they desired? I find it utterly baffling. Yet, I was once a willing participant in all of this. I too had once fervently believed. The master closed his eyes, his silence a heavy shroud. I then understood. It was the deep-seated disdain of those who profit from the vulnerabilities of others. After all, women are just tools. Why bother with the sentiments of a tool? But now, as the tools prove more difficult to control, gentler methods are necessitated. Having invested heavily in a refined instrument, they argue it should be treated with care. Yet in essence, a tool remains merely a tool, does it not? Exhausted, I collapsed to the ground, feeling completely drained. I thought I could hear Su Yuanyuan's footsteps drawing near. The persistent resentments, ever poised to tear me apart and exact a price for actions I never took. My existence itself seemed a fault. Yet, I still harbored a desire to live. At last, Su Yuanyu arrived by my side, a retinue of transformed figures in tow. They had become the very monsters they loathed, slain by those they had once scorned. Su Yuanyu seized my neck. This time, there was no rescuer, and she spared no mercy. My neck snapped, and my body collapsed limply to the ground. But soon I was on my feet again, trailing behind Su Yuanyu as our rampage of killing resumed. The grievances of those who should have been my sisters and aunts now clung to me, immersing me in their profound sorrow and fury. In that moment, my thirst for revenge climaxed. The village faced the unresolved marital dilemmas of over 100 bachelors. Where could these be settled? In polluted ditches on barren hills, down deep wells, in the guts of stray dogs. There to summon the souls of infant girls, discarded and murdered decades earlier, to plead for their forgiveness, to question whether they might ever forgive us. This pattern repeats itself from a single village to a wider region, and even across a nation. Whether on a large or small scale, the nature of the actions remains unchanged. It's merely a question of extent.